DiscerningHearts.com presents Regnum Novum, bringing forth the new evangelization through Catholic social teaching, with Omar Gutierrez. Omar Gutierrez is the special assistant to the Archbishop of Omaha, as well as the manager of the Office of Missions and Justice. He's had numerous articles published in various Catholic publications and is a highly sought-after speaker on various aspects of Catholic social teaching. He is also the author of The Urging of Christ's Love, the Saints and the Social Teaching of the Catholic Church. Regnum Novum, bringing forth the new evangelization through Catholic social teaching, with Omar Gutierrez. I'm your host, Chris McGregor. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be back.
Tell us about Pope Leo XIII.
Well, Pope Leo, I think, is one of those underappreciated popes that we've had. He was, I guess maybe the best way to sum him up is people used to call him a soul that dragged around a body. He was a man of deep intellectual talent, incredible spirituality, really had a sense of the time, the setting and time he was in, and the role of the church in it. He wasn't liked by many of his colleagues in the episcopacy at the time. He was preceded by Pius IX, and Pius IX had a very turbulent pontificate. He started out trying to reach out to the progressive or liberal, or however it is you want to call it, forces of the time, and got burned. And so Pius IX had this sort of adversarial attitude and relationship with the world and with the movements, the intellectual and philosophical movements of the time. And so you have Pope Leo XIII who didn't have this adversarial position. In fact, Leo XIII spent many of his hours, the late hours at night he would spend in praying and reading, by reading the works of Nietzsche and by reading Marx and Engels, by reading the literature and viewing the plays of the time that were considered modern and inappropriate. He would actually get to know some of these contemporary thinkers so that he could therefore respond to what they were saying from the Catholic perspective, from the Catholic point of view. And this willingness of his to engage the current culture and modernism was what garnered for him some suspicion by some of his fellow bishops. But Pius IX, to his credit, understood that Leo XIII had that perfect balance of the man who was at once intellectually honest and at the same time so spiritually grounded that he could take in all this information and respond properly. So here we have a man who is the spiritual man who didn't take care of himself. He didn't eat very much. He didn't sleep very much. He was up late writing and reading an awful lot. He produced something like 80 encyclicals during his pontificate. And yet, at the same time, this is also the man who provided us with the St. Michael prayer, who understood that this was going to be a difficult time in the church, who receives this vision about the great attack from the evil one, and gives the church this prayer to defend us against the evil one. He's also the Pope who gave us St. Thomas Aquinas. And what I mean by that is, it was Pope Leo XIII who said that every seminarian must learn the system of St. Thomas Aquinas. Every seminarian must understand the Summa Theologica, because this system provides an approach to reality that helps the Catholic respond to the modern ideas. It was Pope Leo XIII who gave us not just Rerum Novarum, which we'll be talking about, but also Libertas, on the notion of what liberty means, who gave us a whole document what a Christian citizenry ought to look like, who gave us another document on what the state ought to be doing. I mean, he was a man of such a wide talent, and for some reason he's not really well known by people. So I think one of those great figures of Catholic history who in the midst of the great Catholic persecutions that were happening, during the 1870s and 80s and 90s, instead of sort of pushing off the world, said to embrace the world and lead it to the truth, lead it in light to what the fullness of human beings can be.
This dynamic man is leading a different type of pontificate because of the nature of the Holy See itself. There was a dramatic change with his predecessors. Just the nature of what they oversaw dramatically changed prior to his pontificate.
Exactly. Because of the loss of the Papal States during the reign of Pius IX, Pope Leo XIII is the first pope in a very, very, very long time who doesn't have to directly oversee a vast amount of land, as well as engage himself in the socioeconomic and political problems that are facing the church at this time. It was during the 1880s that the Franco-Prussian War breaks out, and the church is caught in the middle of that yet again. And so Leo XIII has a kind of unique opportunity that he meets very well to address what the role of the church is going to be in this new future of the West.
We're a people, Omar, that proclaims our belief in things seen and unseen.
Yes.
And Pope Leo XIII really demonstrates that, because this great movement of the Holy Spirit to be able to free up leader of the church militant,
yes,
to be able to guide it, really is demonstrated in his not only the grasp of the world around him, but as you said, bringing forth that understanding that there is a spiritual realm.
Yes.
And the threat that is posed to mankind. The St. Michael prayer that he brought forward so that we engage that, but also he's the one that consecrated the coming century to the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Exactly. And he's also the one who gave us a new look at studying Scripture. He's also the first one to address the role of the Holy Spirit, Providentissimus Dei. This is a man who understood the role of the spiritual life and the role of the church in light of this new world, this new enlightened world that said that religion and God were now things of the past. This was the man that we needed, really, and God gave us an incredible warrior, but really, I think, a saint, to take us into the next millennium.
We may not be familiar with the social teaching that he would bring forward, and it would affect the life of the church for a century or more to come.
Exactly.
But many of us are aware of some of the vignettes from his pontificate, namely his encounters with Catherine Drexel and Therese of Lisieux.
With Catherine Drexel, we have this, which is probably the great example of this new industrial revolution. Drexel, whose family had made a lot of money here in the United States, and she was gifted with great wealth, and she understood the responsibility she therefore had. And as she's touring around the country on the money that her family has made, she sees the plight of the blacks and the Indians and Native Americans here, and she knows something needs to be done. They need to be given the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so on a trip to Rome, she goes and meets the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIII, and says that something ought to be done. A mission ought to be made to these black and Indians of the New World. To which the Holy Father responded, "Yes, you're right. A mission needs to be done, and you're the person for it." He gives this back to her, and as we know the rest of the story, she came back from Rome and realized this was her calling, and eventually finds her own order and builds the first schools for black Catholics and Native Americans and opens them up to everybody in need and transforms, really, the opportunities for black and Native American persons here in the United States. So here's Leo XIII right there, sort of effecting here in the United States in a very real way, concrete way, the way we respond to the world and to the needs of the poorest of the poor in our world. And then, of course, you have the whole incident with St. Therese of Lisieux,
which in a very real way is a dynamic contrast between the two women. One would be the mission out in the world, and the other would be the mission within the soul.
Exactly, in Carmel. And so you have this great meeting between the two of them, and you have St. Therese of Lisieux, who is, incidentally, the patroness of the missions, or one of the patrons of the missions, but she's the patroness of the missions, but is someone who, despite the fact she was within the cloister, still manages to affect that change in the world because, as Pope Leo XIII understood, the work out in the world is meaningless, is cannot even be really truly effective unless it is rooted in that relationship with the Christ who loves so dearly, the Christ who loves the little flower, who cares for that little way, those little moments of love. And it was St. Therese of Lisieux who gives us this understanding, this woman who wanted to sort of die for the faith and this great martyrdom that we hear about, later finds herself, may not die by the sword, but by pinpricks, by those little deaths that we all participate in every day. So here we have Leo XIII, who's providing for us, a model for what we should be doing in response to St. Therese and St. Catherine. He doesn't take it upon the church and say, well, the church needs to do this, the church needs to do that, the church will start this mission, or the church will send off this great effort. The Holy Father places it back in our hands. He says to St. Catherine, St. Therese, you become the great missionaries. You take this on. So that Catherine ends up taking it on herself in the concrete physical way, and St. Therese takes it on in this concrete spiritual way by being great missionaries out to the world.
Both have a tremendous love for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They both have a tremendous devotion to the Eucharist.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And that is something that Leo XIII brings forward for all of us as well.
Absolutely. This care for the effectiveness, the importance of the Eucharist. Leo XIII writes about how the Eucharist is at the center, of course, of the Christian life. And we see this picked up, of course, at Vatican II as the font and summit of Christian living. But yeah, Leo XIII provides us with that, again, as many of the popes have, with this spiritual foundation, the very body of Christ that enlivens us to do the work of the church out in the world. I mean, this is that great paradigm shift, whereas previously, because of the violence the world had shown the church, we had this tendency to sort of try to circle the wagons in the church and say, the modern world needs to look after itself. It's Pope Leo who changes the rhetoric. He didn't change teaching. He changes the language the church is using and says, no, the church needs to be the great beacon out in the world. And so instead of cutting off the world, instead of responding as, perhaps Pius IX did with the Syllabus of Errors to say the world is wrong and we don't have to agree with the world, instead Leo XIII says, here's the truth. Come know the Savior. Come know Christ. Come and I invite you to this new relationship.
Rerum Novarum on capital and labor. Absolute fundamental building block of Catholic social doctrine.
Absolutely, exactly right. This is sort of the beginning, the watershed moment for this whole body of teaching, and that we refer to this Catholic social doctrine. This is sort of the groundwork. And it's not to say that there was never anything prior that sort of laid principles, and it's certainly not to say that Pope Leo XIII didn't discuss some of these issues previously. He discusses the notion of freedom and the role of the state and the citizens, etc. But this document addresses this question of labor and capital.
The medieval guilds have collapsed. There have been tremendous strikes.
This is the issue the Holy Father picks up right from the start, which is now that these guilds are gone, what is left then for the labor in this new system, this new industrial system that we have before us? And so in a very real way, in light of this new problem, this problem between capital, and by capital just simply means the resources for industry, so money, but also buildings, and so capital and labor, the things that transform capital into something that's worthwhile. What's this new relationship going to be like? And so he addresses one answer to this new problem, and the answer is socialism. And he names it. This is the socialist answer, and he says the socialist answer, which is to remove private property from the language we use to take away this notion of private property. He said that is wrong. It goes against human nature, it goes against the natural law, and it goes against the needs of the individual. The socialist answer is clearly wrong. And that's important to keep in mind precisely because there are so many today that look at the social doctrine and with a little bit of worry. They hear the word social and they think socialism, right? But this is not it. From day one, from 1891 on, the Holy Fathers were very clear that socialism is not compatible with Christianity.
I think it's important at this point we identify the 800-pound gorilla in the middle of the room, in as much that there are commentators now that take Catholic social justice or Catholic social teaching or Catholic social doctrine, lump it all together, and somehow place a stamp on it and says, Catholic beware. There have been commentators that have even said that if you hear the term Catholic social justice, to run from the church.
Yes.
And literally. Address that, Omar.
Well, that's what the reason why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, this is unfortunate, and it's really robbing us of a great patrimony we have in the church. We've just heard about the wonder of who Pope Leo XIII was. He was a deeply holy spiritual man who gives us this great gift in the social doctrine, and yet we have Catholics who are, understandably in certain cases, but are afraid of it and won't touch it and don't know anything about it. One book on the subject actually called it our best-kept secret. And the reason is because some have abused the social teaching. They've played on perhaps the ignorance of certain Catholics about what it actually teaches, or just through maybe a poor reading or through only a selective reading, they've come up with particular political agendas or approaches to the social teaching that requires one to behave in a way that meets their own personal agenda and doesn't really meet what the Church is trying to provide. The Catholic social doctrine is doctrine. Okay? It's doctrine. We have to follow it. But we have to understand it authentically. We have to understand it in its fullness, what Pope Benedict XVI is going to say, sort of an integrated social doctrine. And so the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIII, is attempting to give us that. And in reality, he lays these principles out really quite clearly. And the first of them is that socialism is not compatible with Christianity.
He also challenges those who would say that, well, that's a sign that the individual should be lifted up then, that they have a right to be able to do whatever they desire. And he even addresses that to the effect that each person is due the good.
Right, each person is due the good, and he places, even in the context of Rerum Novarum, of what the laborer, when he talks about private property, which, the individualist is going to say, you see, social doctrine's about the individual. Well, no. Pope Leo then says the point of private property is certainly to provide for our own basic needs, but more so to provide for the needs of the family. He says that very clearly. It's for the family. And then goes on to say that as Christians, mind you, we understand that private property exists not just for ourselves or for our own family or even for the betterment of society, which of course it does, but private property exists so that we may give it back to God. God gives us these gifts so that we may offer them back to him in sacrifice. I mean, it's the same reason he gives us life, so that we can lay our life down in service of him. Why were we created? So that we may serve him and hopefully be with him forever in heaven. So again, in these questions of capital and labor, the Holy Father is constantly bringing us back to, let's look at this as Catholics. And the Catholic approach is almost never, it's either or, one or the other. It's almost always both and. It's both about the individual and the family. It's both about private property, also the giving up of that private property and the distribution of wealth. It's about all of those things.
This emphasis on the family is essential for Catholics. Why?
It's essential because it does two things at once. In the family, you have yourself recognized as an individual within a context. You are you. Right, you're Chris or you're Omar, but you are Chris and Omar in the context of being the son or daughter, mother or father, sibling. Your identity is caught up in the fullness of who you are as an individual, yes, but also in the context of a community. And that paradigm is always there. In an ideal, properly functioning family, that paradigm is always there. And that's important because if it's only one or the other, if it's only the individual, you run into the air of sort of a libertarian, rugged individualism, individualistic notion. And if it's only communal, then you look at the communism. Right? So the family provides you a paradigm for looking at the human person. The family also provides for the formation and how to understand that, so that your worth, your identity, is based on who you are and not on what you do. And certainly not on what you have, so that the family provides a foundation for how we view ourselves in the context of the wider community. Right from the beginning, the Holy Father invites us, when we're looking at this question of capital and labor, one of the things he invites us to understand is first of all, there is no such thing as class warfare. you need to push that out of the mind. And when we were talking before about my point number 2 about communion versus opposition, this is really where this sort of really meets the head. If we find ourselves approaching this question of capital and labor and economics as red versus blue or left versus right or me versus you, then we've already lost the game. There is no such thing as class warfare. It may exist in literature, it may exist in the press, it may exist in many people's minds, but there's no reason why classes have to be pitted against each other. And there's no necessary reason why the advancement of one class is always going to be at the detriment of another class. And what we need to understand is we're all human persons, and we all need to move forward together in solidarity. So that's the first thing. There's no need for class warfare. And secondly, the Holy Father lays out responsibilities of the laborer, which I think we all pretty much understand. Show up to work on time and be responsible and do the work you're asked to do. Unfortunately, there's statistics out there that show that the average American doesn't actually spend that much time working while he's at his desk. He might be surfing the internet or doing various things he's not supposed to be doing at work. That's a kind of form of stealing. So that we need to be aware of that as laborers. But then he spends an awful lot of time talking about the responsibility of employers, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so he spends a great deal of time on that. And one of the things I think that strikes, in terms of really a paradigm shift for Americans to understand, one of the things that strikes at this fundamental notion about labor is that he says you may not view labor as a commodity. And the reason for that is because labor comes from human persons. It's an extension of our personalities in a way. Archbishop Fulton Sheen says this very same thing, that our labor, our work, is an extension of who we are, even as mundane as it might be on the factory floor. And so because of that, you cannot list labor as just one more commodity on your balance sheet. You have the rent, you have the utilities, you have the overhead of the materials you're trying to transform as you're making the widget. Whatever it is you're trying to, you have all these various things and they're set prices. And so then you add the cost of labor in that. Unfortunately, what happens is when you add that cost of labor in that long list of liabilities or expenses, is that you treat it as a number and not as representing actual persons. So the first thing to do is to recognize that labor is not a commodity. Labor is the extension of human persons. And so when we look at that, then, we can open ourselves up to, when we're looking at something like a just wage, which he talks about next, what is the value, not of to me and the business, but what is the value to the persons? What is the value to the community and my business by what I pay?
What would be the effects of Rerum Novarum to its world in 1891?
The effect was almost immediate and dramatic. Already in the next year, 1892, in this country and countries all over, you saw labor unions rising up, which was a movement that had started already. But there was a great deal of concern and unease about it. And here you have the Pope coming out in this document in support of labor unions, and immediately there was this flowering of labor unions and strikes over legitimate issues, just wage, worker safety. You think of some of the ways that workers were treated. The Holy Father even mentions, you may give your worker a just wage, but you tax him, or you place some other burden on him. You look at the mining operations here in the United States, in West Virginia, for instance, where the worker may have been paid a decent amount, but remotely from other civilizations, from cities, they lived in the mining areas. Well, the only stores available were run by the company that employed them. So the prices at those companies priced them out from what they earned, and so as a result, they were actually indebted to the company more so than they were to real freedom. Those are sort of the practical things that were happening, and Leo XIII is providing this model. So the effect was almost immediate. Unions came forward. Catholics felt able and enlivened and encouraged to go pursue this work towards just wage, this work towards unions. And you see it all the way. In fact, a very dear friend of mine who's passed away now, he was one of the ground level laborers, lawyers even, for the NFL union, who they understood these men who were being used, whose bodies were being used, were left by the age of 30, 40 with these broken bodies and no means to support themselves in the future. And so these are sort of the fundamental effects of this document.
At the heart of all this is the gospel.
Yes.
The basic seed is knowing the person of Jesus Christ.
Yes,
That's
exactly
what you've been
right.
teaching us all along, Omar.
Exactly right. And the Holy Father Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum says then the role of the church in all this is to bring us back to that reality, is to make us understand that at the heart of this new social teaching, this new social doctrine, we have a response to the gospel. And what's beautiful, again, as a result of this teaching, you see beautifully so many of our Protestant brothers and sisters and separated brethren and members from other denominations too and other religions recognizing the justice of this position which comes from the gospel. A dear friend of mine who came into the church recently came in precisely because he was evangelical, came in precisely because of the teaching of the social message, the social gospel, if you will. He understood that if the gospel means what we think it means, if Christ truly was who he said he was, then this must bleed into my economic activity and my labor in the way I view politics and economics. And where is this teaching? And he finds it going all the way back to 1891 in Rerum Novarum and in others, and he realized this is the way of the church. But wonderfully, he didn't just stop with some sort of economic theory. He said there is a spiritual reality here too. There is a spirituality that drives this. So what is that spirituality? And that caused him to pick up Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross and Thomas Aquinas and these great Catholic doctors and thinkers and spiritual writers. And through that, he realized, well, then I must become Catholic. So this is an effect. This is a result of this teaching.
Thank you, Omar.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Regnum Novum, bringing forth the new evangelization through Catholic social teaching with Omar Gutierrez. To hear and or to download this episode, along with many others, go to discerninghearts.com. There too you can obtain a copy of Omar Gutierrez's book, The Urging of Christ's Love, the Saints, and the Social Teaching of the Catholic Church. Or you can find it at any fine Catholic bookstore. This has been a production of discerninghearts.com. I'm your host, Chris McGregor. Join us next time for Regnum Novum, bringing forth the new evangelization through Catholic social teaching with Omar Gutierrez.